Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court decision on abortion and a couple of other decisions. Star Parker joins me to talk about her book, Necessary Noise, New York City defunds the police by $1 billion, and Democrats say July 4th at Mount Rushmore is white supremacy. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
Hello again, and welcome to America Can We Talk, and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. Well, the Supreme Court's been busy in the last few days. I wanted to mention one decision that I'm not happy about, another one that was a great decision, and maybe even get on to a third decision, which was from just, I think, a week or maybe 2 weeks ago. But yesterday, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, struck down a Louisiana law that essentially said that for abortion clinics to function in the state, you had to have a doctor employed at the abortion facility who had practice privileges, admission privileges at a hospital within some geographic distance. The basic point was to make sure that abortion facilities or institutions that provide abortion have doctors there who can actually do something, help when something goes wrong, and get to a nearby hospital because they have admitting privileges. But the Supreme Court struck down that law, Louisiana law, 5-4. But I want to tell you what I really think is the issue that matters to talk about in this arena. Number one, the Supreme Court addressed a very similar law that passed in Texas in 2016. Texas, very similar law. Abortion clinics had to have doctors working there, at least one doctor had admitting privileges in local hospitals. So at that time, in 2016, when the court was looking at the Texas law, Chief Justice John Roberts ruled with the dissent, meaning he ruled the majority struck down the law, saying that it was unconstitutional infringement on a woman's right to abortion. But at that time, Justice Roberts voted in the dissent. He voted to say, no, this is not an unconstitutional limitation on the right to abortion. So now 4 years later, this Louisiana case went up before the Supreme Court. I'm guessing a lot of people thought, well, now that we can predict how the other judges go, we've had some turnover in the court, we'll probably have this law in Louisiana upheld, because everyone assumed Justice Roberts, who thought 4 years ago that such laws were not an unconstitutional infringement on a woman's right to abortion, would stay with what he said. But what he did instead was Justice Roberts, ruled with the majority and struck down the law from Louisiana under the idea of stare decisis. I'm not going to go way off on stare decisis, but the basic point of this doctrine of stare decisis is that courts, especially the Supreme Court, should follow existing precedent so that you don't have the legal system become unpredictable, that you don't have the Supreme Court saying one thing one day, next thing the next day, and so you never really have a settled sense of law. There's a good and right place for the concept of stare decisis, but stare decisis is not a constitutional requirement. It's just a facet of the Supreme Court. One of the most famous examples in all Supreme Court jurisprudence where a Supreme Court reversed a previous Supreme Court ruling was way back in the era when you had the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, which was a Supreme Court decision that had said separate but equal is fine, is constitutionally permissible. Separate but equal facilities for people who are black versus white. Plessy Ferguson said versus Ferguson case back in 1896 said, oh yeah, that's fine. Separate but equal meets the constitutional standard of equal rights. Fortunately, in 1954, the court reversed that in Brown versus Board of Education and say, no, actually, that's crazy. Separate but equal is inherently unequal, and that we must simply reverse ourselves. So I'm getting around back to this whole abortion question and Justice Roberts. This case gave him the opportunity to stand with those who were essentially not committed necessarily, not long-term committed to Roe versus Wade being the law of the land for the rest of time in America. the laws being passed in Texas, Louisiana, and many other states challenging the right to abortion, trying to put restrictions on abortion, are ultimately going to get America to the place where there's going to be an issue squarely presented to the Supreme Court. Was Roe versus Wade wrongly decided? It's going to come to that someday. That was not the issue in this case. It was not the issue that any of the judges should have been addressing in the decision that just came down. But it is obviously the burning out there waiting to be decided. Will we have at some point a reversal of the Roe versus Wade decision and re-examine whether the Constitution actually protects a woman's right to have an abortion? Obviously, that language is not in the Constitution. It was a concocted right that came out of a very liberal court. So I'm not as troubled by Justice Roberts right now as I will be if we get around to that ultimate decision about Roe versus Wade, saying, was this correctly decided? Because the answer clearly is Roe versus Wade was a decision, it was legislating from the bench, it was a policy decision the Supreme Court believed in and put through, no constitutional basis for it. The issue about abortion will end up ultimately, if Roe versus Wade is reversed, back in the hands of the legislature. All states, all 50 states, or 51 if Washington, D.C. gets their way. But anyway, it'll end up back in the state courts, state legislatures, where elected representatives in every state will look at the issue and decide it. So disappointing, really, that Justice Roberts, he seemed, in my view, very much trying to, as he did in the Obamacare decisions, very much trying to make the trendy, politically correct Washington Insiders crowd decision. I don't know him. I don't know his motives, but I think that the decision really was, he did not have to follow, he did not have to say, due to stare decisis, I'm going to go ahead and strike down this law in Louisiana too. He didn't have to do that. That was almost a policy decision. Very disappointing on his part, and very disappointing those who are trying to find various ways to limit abortions in all 50 states. One of the quick decisions out of the Supreme Court that was a very positive thing was the Supreme Court rejected what has been come to know, people understand as the Blaine Amendments. It was a case out of Montana involving religious schools, and basically the court said if the state of Montana or any other state has money or resources available to private schools, not just public, but private, you can't discriminate against religious schools. It was a long process in American history. We got to the point that states felt like, or states were justifying, they would even permit resources of various kinds, state money and resources to go to private schools, but not religious schools. And it was really, at the time, targeted at Catholic schools. But the Supreme Court made a good call on this one, saying, you know what? You just can't discriminate against religious schools if you're giving money to other private schools. It was really a protection of religion, a recognition you shouldn't have law that discriminates against religion as compared with other similarly situated schools. I will tell you that no, this first five today was a little bit wonky, a little bit down in the weeds of Supreme Court jurisprudence, but it really is important for people following the court and people following the idea of what is a right in America, what is a privilege. The policy discussion we need to be having is very important to understand how the Supreme Court tackles these very tender issues, including the one that relates to the effort in Louisiana to limit abortion facilities, to requiring them to have a doctor on hand who actually has admitting privileges in some local hospital, so that when things go wrong, you can actually protect the life of the woman. We'll talk more about this another moment, but I want to wrap up the first five by saying it's really important to follow the Supreme Court, and we do in this show very often. We've had many people assuming that because President Trump has been so successful in appointing judges to the Supreme Court, and he's gotten 2 in, which is a lot in his first term. He may even have, I guess time is getting short, but there's hope that he would have a potential another slot open the Supreme Court to fill. He has done a magnificent job. President Trump has filling the court benches and the federal trial courts, the district courts, the appellate courts, and it's an effort to bring the courts back not to the conservative versus the liberal side, because that's not the goal of judges, is to bring the courts back to compliance with the Constitution and following the law, rather than use the courts, as the left often does, to push through unpopular policies to get their way when they can't get their policies passed by legislatures. It is trying to get the court back to following the Constitution, not legislating from the bench, not putting in place through decisions left-wing policies that leftists in this country want, but that are not actually being created by our representatives in Congress. And that, my very fine friends, is today's first five, or a little longer than five. So we have on the line with us, I believe we have Star Parker. She is joining us by phone. I want to show you before she gets on with us. She has this great book out. And if you were listening to the show, I actually think it was June 1st, the last time Star was on with us, which happened to be the first day of June. Today's the last day of June. Anyway, she mentioned her book at that time, her latest book. She's a wonderful author. This is her latest book called Necessary Noise, and the subtitle is How Donald Trump Inflames the Culture War and Why This is Good News for America. Star Parker, founder of CURE, based in Washington, D.C., the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. She's a brilliant, long-time advocate in Washington for conservative policies to lift all of America up. CURE is, you can find CURE, the organization CURE, at urbancure.org. And Star is their founder and that leads that organization today. And I believe we have Star online. Hi, Star. So we lost the connection, maybe. Okay. We had this setup connection issue. Okay, before she came on, before the show started today, we were talking. I was losing her a little bit. So I think Matt the Wonderful is going to try to figure out what's going on there. In the meantime, I'll tell you, Star is someone who has written numerous books. Last time she was on, I went through the whole litany. We got her now. Okay. Hi, Star.
Yes, I'm here.
I'm so glad you're here. Hi. Well, I was very glad you could join us today. I showed our listeners your book, Necessary Noise, and the subtitle, How Donald Trump Inflames the Culture War and Why This is Good News for America. I was going to close with this question, but I'll just throw it out there now and then come back to it later. I don't know how much more good news we can take with Donald Trump inflaming or the culture war. This has been quite the ride for the last few years. But tell us about your premise in this book, Necessary Noise, what you're talking about.
Well, it has been a bumpy ride. But in my book, I talk about the bumpiness right before the Civil War. I think that we're at a critical cross point in our country, similar to where we were in the 1850s when Abraham Lincoln knew we could not go on anymore, half free and half slave. We had to make a decision. When he looked into the scriptures and read the words of red, meaning Jesus' own words that said a house divided against itself cannot stand, he came up out of that scriptural moment and said, we can no longer be both. We're going to have to make a decision. And I think that what we're finding in the Trump presidency from the moment he was inaugurated until now is that we're at that same point, that we have to make a decision as a society, a civil society. Are we going to be biblical and free, or are we going to be secular and statist? Are we going to allow the tyranny and the totalitarian demands that we're seeing in the streets today be the reality for America in its future? That's basically what the book is about. Now, I wrote it almost 2 years ago, and it was released in November, right when we were in the middle of impeachment. Things were getting very dark and loud then. We had just come out of the whole Russia gate, and then we went into a time of quiet for one moment, and the next thing we knew, we had COVID, and now we're in racial unrest. So that noise is going to get louder. We battle in the voting booth. Let's hope that this year we will end up battling once again in the voting booth. But I'm really not sure. If there is anything that Joe Biden has said that's coherent, is that this next election is about the soul of America. And if what we've been seeing on the news and what we're seeing in Seattle and what we're seeing right here in our nation's capital is not a sign of, to everyone, of a sign of fear, that what is at stake is the soul of America, then I don't know what will wake them up. Do I think the noise is necessary? I absolutely do. Can we relate it to even some of the Supreme Court decisions that you just mentioned? We absolutely can. Abortion is an illusion. It is a crime against humanity, and it feeds a narrative that people do not have to be responsible with their choices, and it is now in the streets of our society. The good news is that the court also ruled on Espinosa, as you also mentioned. Our nation's future lies in that Espinosa case, because now we have an opportunity for money to follow children to schools parents want, including schools where you're going to learn about the beauty and principles of Christianity, of capitalism, and of our Constitution, so that that next generation will be prepared to keep this country free.
Yes, that Espinosa decision, the one I mentioned, that is where the law came from the state of Montana. Blaine amendments had been kind of a trend in the country, where states would say they would let money go to some private schools, but not religious schools. I love that the Supreme Court was very strong on that. It was a great decision. And it is a decision which I think ties into among the many things that Urban Cure, your organization, does so well, which is advocate for school choice, advocate for the way to bring change to communities of color, low-income communities around this country. To bring change is to allow school choice. So I want to make sure, to your point, I'm making your point clear, understanding your point clearly. This decision in Espinosa is really enabling school choice to expand, right?
It is a game changer. When you start thinking about what this means to overturn all 40 Blaine amendments in one sweep, we have been fighting for this moment as long as I've been in this battle, which is 25 years. But even prior to that, where money would follow children to schools parents want, in particular when you're talking about those that are most disenfranchised and those that are in our most desperate and deplorable communities. They need a fighting chance. Family life has broken down. The only place we get them is in that classroom. And what we've done as a society is allowed for the government to fund union-controlled classrooms, and the students have been indoctrinated in a worldview to hate this country, in a worldview that America is inherently evil and therefore it must be overthrown. And that's who are in the street today, these 20-year-olds. What we need is a new generation that understands the beauty of America, that this country is good. So yes, this is a critical decision, including and especially for those that are hit hardest by life in our great country. When you think about the difference between Michael Brown, who we all know his name from Ferguson, some say suicide by cop, because most people will not run up on a police officer with a gun without then having the fruit of that gun in their heart, and Simone Biles, who many people know brought us home the gold. Some say the most fantastic gymnast in the history of the world. Well, what is the difference in their educational life? In their family life, they both came from horrible brokenness. They were both at the place that we study here in Washington statistically. But Michael Brown went to a government school. Michael Brown lived in a community to where they had a Blaine Amendment, so he could not get out of that school, even if his mother wanted him out of that school, so that we could put a virtue and a worldview in him that would counter all of the mishaps that he was born into, as opposed to Simone Biles, who, when she was adopted up by her grandfather, they put her in a Catholic school where she learned traditions. Then they homeschooled her. The difference in her life, the only place that we as a civil society get other people's children to help them shape themselves to become healthy adults, is in that classroom. So Espinosa is giving us that opportunity now, where money can follow children to schools parents want. So I see over the next 5 years a revolution in some of our most hard-hit communities as we start seeing the movement of these poor students going into Christian schools where they can learn about healthy patterns and civility.
That is beautiful. I could not agree more. Your book, I wanted to mention for our listeners, because I do want to have a bunch of questions I want to go to, but your book, Necessary Noise, How Donald Trump Inflames a Culture War and Why This is Good News for America, you hit on so many topics in which you kind of lay out where America was after 8 years under President Obama, and then what President Trump inherited, what he had to deal with. And one of the wonderful traits about President Trump, and we saw it in the campaign, and I was very nervous about him during the primary. I thought that his presence in the primary and even in Washington might be disruptive and maybe even dangerous to America. But I've come to so deeply appreciate him and his bravery and his clarity on many, many issues. You mentioned, for one thing, that President Trump had misunderstood the dangers of multiculturalism, and also and he discussed how American exceptionalism was important, and this just unnerved the diversity clan, to use your term. It's been a
Right.
wonderful thing. Yeah, I'd love to have you comment about why you found that to be important to mention.
Well, what I did was looked at 5 areas where we see a lot of noise. We hear a lot of noise, and it has been going on for a long time. So I make the case that, God, it says that the heart of man is in his hand, and he turns it the way he wants to. And we were at a moment in our history where we couldn't go on anymore as we were. So he needed a disruptor in the White House. We needed to confront ourselves and who we are as a nation. I mean, 60 million abortions. This is just not good for a society to survive. When you think about redefining marriage, so I look at 5 areas. I look at the swamp noise, why we have not been able to get anything done here in Washington, D.C. I look at the tolerance noise where you're talking now, multiculturalism. You hear the Democrats saying now that, racism is systemic and that's why we have police brutality. Any systemic racism that we do have or we can identify are rooted in this whole messaging of multiculturalism, inclusivism, and diversity that they have put into every one of our institutions to where we now have to go around looking for race behind every face. So I talk about that quite extensively. I talk about the tolerance noise that we're constantly hearing from these youth who think they know so much more than every generation before them, that we are going to succumb to their worldview or they're going to terrorize us. I talk about the gender noise and what is happening there with this LGBTQ community, to where biblical people cannot even voice their freedom to the First Amendment, to expression of their religion. And then I talk, of course, about the black noise and how this Black Lives Matters is rooted in totalitarianism. If anyone wants to know what Black Lives Matters mean, you can go to their own website and they will tell you that they believe even traditions like conjugal marriage, where a husband is married to the mother of the children, is Western civilization, and so therefore it's racism in its very being. And then I talk about opportunity noise, what we can have if we make sure that in this 2020 election we vote for values, we vote for the mercy that God extended when he gave us Donald Trump. A lot of Christians know the difference between grace and mercy. Grace is not getting it's getting what you don't deserve, but mercy is not getting what you do deserve. When you think about grace, getting the blessings of freedom, but mercy, we deserved death as a society because we've let all of our institutions be corrupted from our founding. The founding principles are solid and clear, principles of Christianity and capitalism and our Constitution, and all of this has been disrupted, including in our schools. So therefore, we have a second opportunity to turn things around. Our first reborn was in the Civil War. Our second reborn is in 2020 election.
I love that idea. And actually, I was going to run through you have your book divided in 5 parts. You just mentioned swamp noise, tolerance noise, gender noise, black noise, and opportunity noise. Many, many good points you make, and many dipping back into history, explaining how we got here, where we are now. I want to commend you just for how deeply thoughtful this book is, and how it takes beyond just a political R versus D, left versus right, conservative or liberal, and it's really a very rooted in the ideas of the founding of America, rooted in the notions of the Judeo-Christian ideas that shaped the idea of America to start with, and then how those got carried forward and how we kind of lost our way in them. And so we are watching, as you say, we're just watching the outpouring of opposition to all the greatness that America is, because we've had a generation or more of people who never learned it, never understood it, got told just the opposite, actually, when they were in school about America's greatness. And it's so I just can't commend you strongly enough. You even make reference in here, I was going to dive in a little bit on the, you have no police, no peace. And I noticed that obviously it's a huge issue in America today, the allegations. I mean, police brutality obviously exists. We have problems sometimes with police. We've got to try to correct them. But the movement now from the Black Lives Matter, very Marxist-oriented mindset is to defund, and eventually in some places they're talking about replace the police, that defund them, come up with other people, other entities that will somehow replace the police. And in New York City, just this morning, they announced a $1 billion, B as in boy, $1 billion cut to the budget, the police department budget in New York City. What's your sense of how that will impact the black community in America?
Well, I think it's an eye-opener for African Americans that are in the middle class to see how quickly one discussion about police brutality can move to talk about overthrow in America. I don't believe that most middle-class African Americans buy that idea. And what they're now hearing is that any police brutality that we do see is connected to union influence to protect bad cops. So this is a turning point, I believe, for many that are overseers of these smaller communities and even our larger cities to say, hey, wait a minute, perhaps we should rethink that if we have no police, we don't have peace. And we can see it very loudly, not just here at what they're calling now Black Lives Matters Plaza, but also up in Seattle. The duplication of what they've done to our nation's capital, which is totally destroyed at this moment. But when you talk about community policing, which is what most African Americans say that they want, then you cannot have union contracts that are in violation of that say that police officers cannot live in the communities that they are to safeguard, that they are to serve. So I think that this is a good moment. You know, in the Chinese symbol of crises, it has two things, danger and opportunity. So while it is extremely dangerous, this noise that we're hearing, and it will get worse going into November, but it's also a good opportunity for us to make the case for a rule of law. It is a great opportunity for us to talk about those founding principles that, no, they did not learn in their schools. That's the problem. For the last two generations, they've not heard anything beautiful about the founding of the country and why it works for anyone from any background or any ethnicity, and why so many want to be here, because they've been governed and ruled by this leftist mentality, as you're calling, of Marxism. So, you know, while things are pretty dark, and I'm actually living in a food desert out here, as they call them in Washington, because they destroyed any and all opportunities for us to get any type of everyday product. It is also a good opportunity for us to have these deeper discussions that have needed to take place for quite some time.
Star, I thought of you in an article I read this morning. This was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn actually had a piece out, and he has this statement he makes. I was once told if we're not careful, 2% of the passionate will control 98% of the indifferent 100% of the time. And I thought of you in this book because we are watching in the current situation with riots and destruction of property and arson, the violence you and I talked about back on June 1st. And we're watching kind of culturally, it seems like we've seen more of the advocates on the far left, Marxist, angry, anti-American, denigrating the ideas of America, denigrating the Christian faith, denigrating the very structure of our country and Judeo-Christian values. The critics have been loud and persistent, and they have been persuasive. And I think his point is well taken. If the rest of the 98% of us sit back and say, either are indifferent or don't want to offend, don't want to speak up, the loud, the squeaky wheel, so to speak, the loud protesters win. So your book is really a tremendous kind of speaking up for the 98% who actually love this country, love the ideas of this country. And I wonder if you want to comment about that concept that really the squeaky, loud voices seem to get response until the rest of us speak up.
Well, I agree with you, and I appreciate that you see the significant role that my book has in this discussion that we're having. And for anyone that wants the language of what they need to say, all that say, well, I don't know what to say, even to their own children, and why their own children are out there protesting and putting themselves at risk for not just COVID, but to be killed because some have an agenda behind this lawlessness that we're seeing. But we have to ask ourselves that with elected officials, where are they? Where is anyone standing with what the president needed to do to walk over to St. John's Church with a Bible and say enough of this? We're a country of rules. And I believe that without that outcry from those that we have elected and people that are in power, that is one of the reasons that we're now seeing the pulling down of statues, because people left the president by himself to go over there and declare that this is a country, a rule of law. Law is rooted in truth, and truth is rooted in God. He didn't say that, but that's what he was saying holding up the Bible. But you didn't see of the masses of those that are here in the swamp coming to his defense. And so their next move was to take him on, and now they're all over the country pulling down statues and just absolute craziness behind the damage that they're doing to our great country. So I'm still waiting for not just the silent majority to stand up and say something and have the tools to know what to say, but I'm looking for these so-called leaders in the Republican Party to stand up and put an end to this and tell these little suburban white kids that are wreaking havoc over this country to go home. They need to go home. Colleges are closed. There was no reason for them to go out into the streets and protest. In fact, everyone that bought into this, well, they had a right. No, they did not.
Right.
Everyone around the world was appalled by what we saw in that video. So therefore, we knew justice would be done. We are not in this 1950s. And for them to have been able to narrate it out, and you had people of goodwill and good meaning to narrate with them that, well, they're a little angry and they just need to go out and vent. No, your grief is your own. You go inside and you write a poem. You don't go into the streets and destroy other people's property. So we're in war. We're in war. But the president, Donald Trump, stopped the arms war when he walked across Lafayette Park and held up his Bible. They are still here. They're still damaging here in Washington, D.C., but it would be really nice if we could find one or two politicians to get up and say, he was absolutely right, and they join together. Perhaps they should join together arm in arm around the Capitol and say, enough of this lawlessness. Go home, you lousy little spoiled, rotten brats. And we're hoping that your colleges do not reopen so that they cannot continue this dialogue inside of these Ivy League towers while they're using the backs of those that are most vulnerable, most poor, and are devastated by the damage that they've done through their so-called Black Lives Matters campaign.
Star, I'm almost speechless. First of all, I couldn't agree with you more. Love everything you just said. And actually, this is a point I've been making in my show throughout this time period when we're watching the riots and destruction, the statues pulling down. What leftists would like more than anything is to have America think that we're in a race war, that all of this is about one race versus another race. And actually, many people are pointing out, myself included, that the Marxist ideas behind the Black Lives Matter movement, the Marxist idea that are pushing Antifa, these are being led by extreme radical leftist white intellectuals. It is not a race war. It is a battle of ideas, holding on to the idea of America, the goodness and greatness of America, or letting it be destroyed. And unfortunately, the white, extreme leftists, Marxist, socialist, communist, whatever category they want to claim they are, those people stirring up America into division and inspiring young people to do things, which I think if you ask some of the protesters, they don't even know why they would think about tearing down a statue. But there's an agitation behind it that is really where the battle is. The battle is about, are we going to have America as founded, or as you put it in at the beginning of your book, America as founded, a society that's biblical and free, or a society secular and statist. Love it. Love your book. I do want to give you a quick chance. Star, you have a new podcast. Can you tell our listeners about your podcast?
Well, it's actually it's a live TV show. It's an hour, so it's not a podcast. It's live, and it's cureamerica.news is where you'll find it, urbancure.org or cureamerica.news. But it's a weekly news talk show directed specifically toward that silent majority, that 100 million that still got them go to church on Sunday morning. I want them to understand what's at stake. The left is using race to divide and conquer, and they will conquer if we do not stand up. And we will have a tomorrow of America that will not look like America. It will be as a third world country with dictators in charge, and we will then have our grandchildren have to fight to get back to our founding principles of Christianity, of capitalism, and of our Constitution.
And on that note, Star Parker, love having you every time I get to pleasure have you on. I love it. You can find Star Parker on Twitter at Star Parker, her website, urbancure.org, her book, Necessary Noise. You got to get it. It's actually really a fun read. You can see all the little stickies sticking out the side. This is all the questions I wanted to ask, didn't get to. But Star Parker, great book. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome, Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, that book is great. Give it to your liberal friends. Give it to your liberal friends. It'd be a great gift, a July 4th gift. Get it for them this week. Order from Amazon and send it to your friends as a July 4th gift. Fabulous discussion about the big issues facing America. Two more topics today in this show. One is I want to talk about what happened in New York City. There was a lot of talk in all these protests about defunding the police. And honest to goodness, I think sometimes you read these things, you think, okay, well, this is kind of the crazy leftists. This is the extreme. This is the 2%, the Occupy Wall Street, the Antifa crowd. But actually, it's happening. It's happening. In Minneapolis, where I've mentioned you many times, I have tugs at my heartstrings. My dad grew up there in Minneapolis. We've been there. I've been there dozens of times in my life. Was a really lovely, cool city, and it has been completely overtaken by radical leftism. The Minneapolis City Council has moved to defund police, and they have a growing homeless area in some park there. I didn't recognize the name of the park, but where they're causing trouble. But who do you call? It's like you're going to call the local social worker. So you have defund police, massive problem in Minneapolis, but in New York City this morning, New York City, big city, densely populated. You had Mayor de Blasio announcing the decision of the city council. They are going to reallocate $1 billion, B as in boy, $1 billion from the New York Police Department budget to youth and community services. So I want to tell you, New York City cleaned up during the era when Rudy Giuliani was mayor, really cleaned up. They had the broken window concept, which is, we're not going to wait until a person commits a series of low-level crimes and then they commit a big crime and then we arrest them for the first time. We lay the law down now. We're not going to have, you can't be flinging rocks at windows and breaking windows. You just can't get started down the life of crime. So New York cleaned itself up under Mayor de Blasio, the radical leftist, just insane radical leftist, has agreed with the Black Lives Matter demand to defund the police. I want to tell you that in New York City, which everyone understands, there are areas, in every big city, there are areas where the crime is more common and other areas considered relatively safe. But in New York City, if you defund the police department, in a city of that size, you're destroying morale. The police are recognizing, hey, there aren't enough of us. They're also talking about cutting out overtime. They've got all sorts of other things they're trying to do in this. They're trying to cut $1 billion in labor costs. So anyway, this is what they're doing. And I want to tell you what's going to happen in New York City. It's a level of crazy you can't even believe. Number one, the law-abiding will leave. Crime kicks up. It's happening in Dallas. We have an increasing problem here in Dallas. Nothing like New York City. And people are talking about getting out of Dallas County. We have a district attorney in Dallas County who said, hey, you know what? If you steal things, we're not going to arrest you. You just steal things. I mean, as long as it's not worth more than $750, hey, you know what? No problem. So crime is on the uptick here. Violent crime has become more of a problem in Dallas than it has been in the past. So, but back to New York City. The law-abiding will leave. The law breakers, the criminals, will accelerate. They're not worried. The police aren't going to be around. There won't be enough police around. You're also going to have the problem of defunding the police is that the entire equation is wrong. The equation you're saying was, well, we have a lot of crime, and we have police brutality, and we have some instances like everyone, Star made reference to, we talked about in the show before, obviously, what happened in Minneapolis with the officer with his knee on the neck of George Floyd, horrible incident. Everybody of every political background, racial background, everyone understood that was a horrible incident. They are prosecuting that police officer and the other officers who stood around watching. They're prosecuting that. No one was arguing this is good police procedure. No one was arguing that. If you watched our show a few weeks ago, we had Officer Brandon Tatum talking about a lot of the reforms that the left is demanding are reforms police are already doing. So that no one in the police world is saying, yeah, that was a great thing that officer did in Minneapolis. But back to New York City, the law breakers will accelerate. The law abiding, who are also the tax paying, they're going to move out. They're not going to just stay in a city where they can't get police protection. So the tax base will go down because people who earn money and want to live in safety are not going to hang around New York City as they let the entire city collapse without sufficient policing. And I'll tell you the real problem, or one of the real significant issues that relates to this whole community policing idea. Community policing is one issue where you might say, in domestic violence situations, maybe instead of just police officers trying to break it up, you want to have police officers refer to someone who's a social worker or a marriage counselor, someone who's trained to help in these situations of domestic violence. That's a great idea. Go for it. Great idea. No one's saying that's a bad thing. But that's all was already happening, is happening more. But here's the thing. If you're going to take $1 billion out of the New York City Police Department budget and put it over in community programs, midnight basketball leagues, the other suggestions they had, things like find jobs for kids in the summer. They just need jobs. If they all had jobs, they wouldn't be committing crime. Not so sure about that, because the real kinds of problems that lead to the massive crime problem in New York City are things that a budget in the police department, a shift in the budget in the police department cannot change. These are the kind of things Star Parker talks about in her group, Urban Cure, what you really need for young people growing up, especially without a lot of income. You need to have two-parent families, intact families. So you have a dad and a mom actually helping a child understand right from wrong. You have a role model of one or both parents going to work, making clear this is what you do in life. You have to go to work and earn a salary and come home, and that's how you can pay the bills and what your expectation is of your life. Nothing about midnight basketball leagues or finding jobs for kids who are otherwise in the streets is going to cure the real issues that are eating away at the fabric of low-income families in New York City. It is a false promise for de Blasio, for the leftists to be claiming that what we're going to end up doing is having the problem solved of police brutality because we're going to have midnight basketball league. Just the intact family issue, the role models, the quality schools, the kind of issues, again, Star Parker pushes that. We have to get quality schools available for kids in low-income areas so they're not stuck in the zip code mandated school that doesn't do them any good, that doesn't help them. These are the kind of things that actually solve the problems. Shifting money in a budget and finding other way and reducing the police presence in the largest city in America, not going to go well. And actually, I'll tell you the other thing that is going to end up happening of all this, which is that you're going to find that people may be sympathetic to the Democrat Party, may be sympathetic to the way leftists see things, are going to say, wait a minute, what the left in the country stands for today, what the Democrats stand for, is just getting rid of policing, just letting the community handle a thing, decide what they think ought to be done. It's a very, very dangerous thing, very, very dangerous time, crazy, crazy time. Matt the Wonderful, I sent you a tweet. This is not the one. I have a couple tweets I sent, or maybe three. But there was one that was from, in New York City, was from someone who was commenting on the commitment to shift the $1 billion budget from the police over to youth services. I don't know if you have that one, Matt the Wonderful. Okay. I want to point out how extreme the left has become. So here they have prevailed on New York City to say cut the budget, and they're still complaining about the budget wasn't cut enough. This is the Office of the Public Advocate Journal. I don't know how to say this woman's name, Jumaine D. But she's saying that she's watching a budget vote, and she's still saying she wants more and more things cut from the police department. Not happy with $1 billion cut. She's a community advocate. Wants to be able to tell the budget people in New York City and the police in New York City how they get to spend their money. Very, very dangerous, kind of emboldening of just kind of a notion that, yeah, we're going to let the community advocates tell us how we police in this country. I'm not saying police are perfect. I know police have to sometimes, we have to have retraining, we have to fire people, we have to prosecute officers sometimes. But you can't demoralize a police department, cut their budget, demand all sorts of changes from them, and expect them to continue the robust law enforcement you need when you are in New York City. So de Blasio, in my impression, just he has emboldened the Trump agenda. He has emboldened people in New York City to vote for Donald Trump, because you can't have the crazy of de Blasio and the Democrats destroying the police. Last thing I want to hit on today briefly, there was this most amazing story. So Mount Rushmore, we talked about it yesterday, Mount Rushmore, this beautiful national monument in South Dakota, and it has on it, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. That is the Mount Rushmore. So President Trump had the idea, because it's such an iconic symbol of America, these four faces carved in the mountains of South Dakota, that he's doing a July 4th celebration there. A July 4th celebration that's intended to have fireworks and everyone's going to see that, celebrate that. And it's a very Americana, American history, love of America. Our family did a drive around the country. When the kids were growing up, we have 3 kids who are now grown. We drove around the country and saw, the national parks and the monuments, and we went hiking and camping. It was really, really fun. We had a trailer and just had a really great summer vacation one year. Mount Rushmore was pretty much everybody's favorite. It's so powerful. It's so, in our family, I mean, so powerful, so symbolic of America's goodness. So there you have, Trump's decided he's going to have a July 4th celebration there, including with fireworks. So I want to ask Matt the Wonderful to put up a tweet that came from the Democrat Party. This is the Democrat Party put up this tweet about the Trump plan at Mount Rushmore on July 4th. And that is, if we have it, there we don't. Okay, there we go. Trump. This is the Democrats. This is the Democrat Party. Mind you, they quick took it back down when they realized how bad it was. Somebody, like a grown-up in the room, said, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't be tweeting this out. Trump has disrespected Native communities time and again. He's attempted to limit their voting rights and block critical pandemic relief. Now he's holding a rally glorifying white supremacy at Mount Rushmore, a region once sacred to tribal communities. And the bottom caption reads, Trump's Mount Rushmore fireworks plan draws criticism from Native Americans. So you have the Native American community not liking this, and you also have, of course, the left's relentless effort to describe President Trump, Republicans, conservatives, anyone who likes President Trump as racist, white supremacist. It's what the left uses in this country to get their way on every single issue. The left is using the argument of racism to bring Marxism to this country. The Black Lives Matter Antifa marches are not about racial justice and racial equality. They're about forcing Marxism on America under the banner of allegedly standing up for racial justice, but that's not what the marches are about, or else they'd be doing all sorts of different things. But back to this Mount Rushmore thing, I want to make a couple quick points, really, really important to understand, especially because when I talked about this story, I think yesterday in the show, I had several people email or comment, basically, well, Mount Rushmore was built, was carved out of mountains that previously were part of that were Native American territory at some point, and they had the, and they have Native Americans who are opposed to this because they are opposed to the existence of Mount Rushmore. They're opposed to the idea that we would honor Mount Rushmore as symbolizing America, and they're offended that this is land that the Native Americans are saying was, in fact, theirs originally. And that's the point I want to get to in one sec. But one other thing about Mount Rushmore. So a recent poll of liberals and extreme liberals in this country, 44% of liberal respondents and 58% of very liberal respondents agree Mount Rushmore should be destroyed, should be eliminated. I don't know, you can blow up the mountain. I don't know what they're thinking about. But I really, really want to get at this point that why the left hates the symbolism of Mount Rushmore, why they are complaining about the idea that there's going to be July 4th celebration there and that President Trump is going to have a fireworks show. It's because those images, that park, that carving in the mountain of the 4 presidents is symbolic of love of America, of the goodness of our country, and this is what drives the left nuts. You've got to start to get this idea. Leftism in America today, not just Antifa, not just the extremists, not just Occupy Wall Street. The left in America today is profoundly hateful of America. They hate the idea of America. And why they hate the idea of America is what you were hearing from a moment ago from Star Parker, and my show we've been talking about, is because we've had hatred of America woven into the fabric of education in this country for decades. But back to Mount Rushmore, why the left is driven so nuts about this is because it's a brilliant idea of reminding people of our national heritage, the greatness of our national heritage, the greatness of our country. This is what drives the left nuts, that President Trump is going to commemorate Independence Day at such a patriotic location as Mount Rushmore. But I want to address the whole argument about Native Americans having opposition to this. And there were statements by leaders in Native American groups saying, this is really offensive. And by the way, that tweet I just showed you, it was up for a while before someone, like a grown-up in the Democrat Party, said, hey, wait a minute, we shouldn't be tweeting this out. But I'm getting the idea that there have been Native Americans commenting. I'll just give you one example. Oglala Lakota tribe member Nick Tilson said, Mount Rushmore is a symbol of white supremacy, of structural racism. It's still alive and well in society. It's an injustice to actively steal indigenous people's land and then carve the white faces of the colonizers who committed genocide. And this is what I want to close out the show today by talking about. I did a quick Google search of, who owned various lands basically in North America, including the Mount Rushmore area, which Native American tribes were there. And I want to make something crystal clear. We're going to get to the settlers coming, the settlers from Europe in a moment. But the Native American tribes in what we now call United States of America, what we now call Canada, there were Native American tribes spread all over that arena, that area. They literally engaged in war after war after war after war after war against each other. There were wars especially that sprung up when there was drought, when there wasn't enough rain, crops weren't growing. But the farce that the left tries to paint of a peaceful place in North America, what we now call United States of America and Canada, where peaceful Indian tribes lived in peace and had, just a lovely, peaceful community, and everything was perfect until the settlers came along, is hogwash. I Googled it today, just, in 20 minutes before I left home today. There are dozens of books written recounting all of the battles between one tribe, the next tribe, which tribe tried to conquer which ones, the violence, the taking of scalps, which is a trendy thing in some tribes. It is a farce. It is a lie to tell the American people that the reason that we can't have Mount Rushmore is because we invaders came from Europe and we invaded an otherwise peaceful, harmonious group of Native American tribes all over this land of America and Canada. They were all living in harmony peacefully and nothing bad was going on. I mean, that literally historians have written encyclopedic level books describing all of the ongoing warfare and violence between many and among the Native American tribes. That's just reality. So the farce that there was this peaceful land that got invaded by the European settlers is just a farce. Second point. This is also true. What happened with settlers coming to America has happened throughout world history in every region of the world. Until we had the concept of nation states, which still has not ended invasion by one state into another, but until we had that idea of nation states, we had endless battles of various groups claiming a certain piece of geography, a certain piece of dirt on the earth, and some other group invading and taking over and conquering. This is human history. This is not just the history of America and the white supremacists that the left are always getting at. It's the history of the world. It's the history of the way the world evolved until we got to what we now call civilization, which is we have countries with structure, with laws, with governance, with a government in charge. The Native American communities scattered throughout what we now call America, never had a one nation. They had nation of this tribe, nation of this tribe, nation of this tribe captures this tribe kills that tribe. That's what the history was. And so, even if you want to say, but yes, at some point in history, this particular mountain range in South Dakota was the land that belonged to one particular tribe, that tribe didn't have that mountain forever. That tribe, historically, had some tribe before it that had control of that, had some tribe before that. The tribes have history of battling, reclaiming, fighting over land. And so if you want to say, well, the Americans cannot have Mount Rushmore because this Oglala tribe says it's theirs, well, who had it before the Oglala tribe? And who had it before the tribe that had it before that tribe? The history of the earth is filled with people who claimed land, had battles, had wars, and until we got to the more civilized concept of a nation state. And as I say, even nation states, the existence of those do not change the reality, does not change the reality that other invading groups may come and try to take over. It's what Hitler tried to do in Germany, from Germany. He wanted to take over all the nation states created in Western Europe. He wanted to go all over the world. The point is, when people in America are complaining about President Trump using the beautiful patriotic backdrop of the Mount Rushmore in South Dakota as a backdrop for fireworks and rejecting that because that represents white supremacy, they don't know what they're talking about. America our settlers came to this country and created a country where eventually all Native Americans can become American citizens. And they don't have to, but they're welcome to. And in our country, we had Native Americans who had, it wasn't a perfect history, just like our history. No country's history is perfect. But we had a country, we created the most extraordinary experiment in human liberty ever to bless the earth, right here in America. And for people to say, yeah, but you can't be there because that was where some tribe claimed their land was, and you can't be there, you can't be there. Well, there's always the question back, well, who had the land before them? And then who had the land before them? How far back in history do you go to decide whose land something is that you're staring at today? How far back in history do you go? Do you say, well, sometime around, 100 AD, there were these very primitive people, and they were in this area. Maybe we should find their descendants. Maybe it's really their land. The idiocy, it's a farce to complain about the beauty of Mount Rushmore and America as a country creating a civilized, ordered society when there was not one here before that, and the kind of utopian picture of the Native American tribes living in harmony and joy and peace until the settlers came from Europe. This has nothing to do with reality. Human history has all sorts of experiences like that. I think America should be as generous and kind as we can be toward people who are of Native American heritage and want to have a certain area of land that's still theirs. Fine. And we can be generous and we can try to help the children in those families get education, understand the greatness of America, understand they're welcome to become citizens of America. We can do all that. But when people, even watching this show, but others complaining about Mount Rushmore as really belonging to Native Americans, it's a bunch of hogwash, and you've got to be able to fight back and say why. Because anyone saying, well, this really belongs to X tribe, you ask them, so who had that area before that tribe? And then who had the area before that tribe? And before that, and before that. How far back do you go to decide who owns what? We in America have the United States of America since 1776, or if you want to say after we won the war, we've been in America for hundreds of years. This is America. We're the most generous, noble nation on earth. We include areas that formerly had a prevalence of various Native American tribes. We can try to treat them fairly. We can try to bring them into the American culture. We can try to let them stay in their Native American culture if that's what they want. But we're not going to destroy America and the idea of America because someone puts the word white supremacist as a criticism for celebrating the July 4th holiday at Mount Rushmore. My friends, I'm out of time for the show. I do, at the end of every show, I like to tell you, again, why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started today with the Supreme Court, the abortion decision. We actually hit several decisions, but we'll just talk about this one. The SCOTUS decision invalidating Louisiana law imposing medical accreditation standards on abortion facilities is just another testimony to the smallness of John Roberts. Roberts voted in a dissent just 4 years ago that a nearly identical Texas law was constitutional, but now says stare decisis compels him to strike down this Louisiana law as unconstitutional. Roberts was unprincipled in upholding Obamacare, pure political engineering without regard to the rule of law. He seems driven by a raw desire to be in step with a contemporary Beltway wisdom and shows a willingness to use legal sophistry as the means to justify the end. Stare decisis does not eliminate the obligation of a Supreme Court justice to follow the Constitution. But the real test will be when Roe versus Wade is challenged directly. And that one, we hope, you can find even Justice Roberts saying he's not bound by stare decisis, and we can overrule a decision that had no basis in the Constitution to start with. Okay, and New York City defunds the police by $1 billion. Only in a leftist mind does defunding the New York Police Department result in anything good for anyone in New York City. every resident of New York City of every skin color, gender, or ethnicity would be less safe. Every resident of New York City of every skin color, gender, every resident of New York City with the means to make a choice will likely leave. Only in ivory towers of philosophy can social workers perform the function of police. In the real world, this is a prescription for chaos, not order. Human flaws of anger, hatred, coveting, and envy do not disappear because of shifting police funding to youth basketball leagues and other social programs. The police aren't perfect, but this rebellion against the police is really a Marxist-led rebellion against the American foundation of law and order. Bill de Blasio is a delusional leftist. New York City is paying a huge price for electing him. And as for the Dems, on July 4th, Mount Rushmore is white supremacy. Democrat Party tweet derides Trump's 4th of July-related trip to Mount Rushmore as a celebration of white supremacy. Americans must recognize what this message says, though the Democrats quickly took the tweet down later. About the thinking of today's Democrat Party, America's founding, this is what the Democrats think. America's founding was all about white supremacy. The remedy is to tear down America and this Declaration of Independence. This is what Democrats stand for. This is what they will do. This is what is at stake. President Trump is the only American leader standing firm and clear in opposition to the destruction of America. Whether you like his personality or not, the Destroy America alternative means lawlessness and loss of freedom descending on America. And that, my friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Tune in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I will talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.